What they didn't know, and what Jax had banked on with his characteristic blend of desperation and improbable ingenuity, was that the escape pod had a rarely used experimental emergency ejection seat, not a pilot's seat, but a seat that could be ejected, along with a minimal life support bubble for mere seconds of atmospheric re-entry or a desperate jump in the vacuum of space. It was designed for situations where even the escape pod itself was compromised, a last-ditch effort that usually ended in a very sad, very lonely death. But Jax had a plan, a ridiculous, utterly insane plan. Just before the escape pod collided with the asteroid, Jax had manually triggered the ejection, catapulting himself away from the imminent explosion. For a fleeting moment, he was a solitary figure, floating in the blackness, utterly exposed. Then, a small, compressed nitrogen thruster in the seat fired, propelling him not directly away from the krill, but towards a much larger, denser asteroid that was just outside the immediate blast radius. His life support bubble flickered. The cold of space seeped through his suit. "Okay, Riley," he wheezed. "Don't screw this up. It's either glorious victory or becoming a very flat, very frozen pancake." He slammed into the asteroid's surface with a jarring thud, the impact rattling every bone in his body. His life support bubble cracked, alarming his internal systems. He scrabbled for purchase, his gloved hands clawing at the rough, icy rock. The asteroid was one of the hundreds of thousands that formed the outer fringe of the Xylus 7 cluster, a vast, chaotic debris field that offered both cover and extreme danger. He clambered over a ridge, desperately trying to put the explosion behind him, knowing the krill would be scanning for any residual energy signatures. He lay there gasping, not from lack of air, but from the sheer effort and the adrenaline coursing through him. His entire body ached, but he was alive. And he had tricked the krill. Again. "And that," he muttered to himself, "is how you make a dramatic exit. Take notes, space armadillos. This is how we do it back home." He checked his internal comms. They were still online miraculously. He tried to raise Captain Vance. "Captain Vance, this is Riley. You still there, Shadow Weaver?" A long silence. Jax's heart sank. Had she made it? Or had the krill somehow gotten her? Then, a crackle. "Riley, is that really you? I saw the explosion. I thought you were gone." Vance's voice, usually so composed, was laced with genuine shock and a hint of relief. "Reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, Captain." Jax chuckled, pushing himself up. "Just needed a little more oomph for the distraction." "Where are you?" "I'm through the asteroid gap, heading for the rendezvous point," Vance replied, her voice steadying. "Barely. My thrusters are failing. I'm drifting." "Understood," Jax said, scanning his surroundings. "I've got a visual on your general direction. Look for a very small, very resourceful human clinging to a slightly bruised asteroid. I'll transmit my exact position. Try to drift towards me. I've got limited mobility, let's say." It took another agonizing hour. Jax, shivering in his damaged life support bubble, clung to the asteroid, scanning the void. The KRL patrol ships eventually moved on, convinced they had obliterated their tormentor. The silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of his dying life support. Finally, a faint shadow emerged from the cosmic dust, the Shadow Weaver. It looked even more decrepit than he'd imagined, like a metallic ghost ship. Its thrusters were indeed sputtering, and its hull was riddled with burn marks and dents. But it was there, and it was human. "You really cut it close, Captain," Jax said as the Shadow Weaver drifted slowly towards him, its exterior maintenance clamps extending to grab onto his asteroid. "You're one to talk, Riley," Vance retorted, her voice now back to its usual dry, exasperated tone. "Jumping out of an exploding escape pod? What exactly are you made of?" "Mostly caffeine, bad decisions, and an unshakable belief that things can always get worse, so why not laugh about it?" Jax replied. He maneuvered himself into the Shadow Weaver's emergency airlock, the life support bubble finally giving out as the hatch sealed behind him. The internal lights flickered on, revealing Captain Alara Vance, a tall, no-nonsense woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a single gray streak running through her dark hair. She looked exhausted, but her gaze was firm. "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Commander," she said, offering him a hand. "I should have known you'd survive. You're too annoying to die easily. Coming from a captain who pilots a ship older than my grandfather, I'll take that as a compliment. Jax grinned, shaking her hand. So, about that deep recon mission, Captain, you got anything good? Or just more space armadillos and their penchant for aggressive gardening? Vance led him to the cramped bridge. It was a mess of sparking wires and flickering consoles, but the main view screen, remarkably, was still functional. We were tracking a new Carel energy signature, Vance explained, gesturing to the screen which showed a blurry image of the Xylos 7 system. Not a weapon, not a ship, something else, something big. Our initial analysis suggested it was a new type of orbital defense, far more advanced than anything they've deployed before. A new orbital defense? Jax frowned. That's above my pay grade, Captain. My job is usually to blow things up, not analyze their efficiency. Well, your job just got a promotion, Riley, Vance said grimly, because the energy signature isn't coming from an orbital defense. It's coming from something on the planet's surface, something they're building. She enhanced the image on the screen. The blurry shape resolved into a colossal structure, half buried in the planet's reddish dust, its peak scraping the lower atmosphere. It pulsed with an ominous, low-frequency energy. It was immense, far larger than any Krill structure Jax had ever seen. By the void, Jax breathed, his humor momentarily forgotten. What is that thing? We don't know, Vance admitted, but my last remaining drone, before it was shot down, managed to send back one last data packet. A single word repeated over and over in the Krill language from their internal comms near the structure. She paused, her eyes meeting his. The word was ascension. Jax felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vacuum of space. Ascension? What does that even mean? We believe it's a superweapon, Vance said, her voice grim, something capable of disrupting stellar systems, a world ender in their own parlance. And judging by the energy readings, it's almost complete. Jax leaned closer to the screen, his mind racing. A superweapon, here, and the HCDF had no idea. So my distress beacon, it went to the right people, but it also told the Kroll exactly where I was. And now they know we're here, even if they think I'm cosmic dust. Precisely, Vance confirmed. And our combined ships couldn't fight off a single Kroll fighter, let alone a fleet. We're stranded behind enemy lines with critical intelligence that could change the course of the war. Jax rubbed his chin, a familiar glint returning to his eyes. So what you're saying is, we're totally screwed. Our ships are kaput. The Kroll are probably sending their entire navy after us, and we've just discovered a doomsday device. Vance nodded slowly. That's a fair summary, yes. Excellent, Jax declared, a wide, unrepentant grin spreading across his face. This is perfect. Vance stared at him, bewildered. Perfect? Riley, what in the name of the cosmic void are you talking about? Jax tapped the view screen, pointing at the colossal Kroll superweapon. Think about it, Captain. If that thing is almost complete, we can't just run, we have to stop it. And we're two humans, deep in enemy territory, with no backup, no heavy weapons, and a ship that's held together with spit and wishes. He turned to her, his eyes sparkling with a dangerous, manic energy. This isn't a problem, Captain. This is an opportunity. An opportunity for the greatest human underdog story the galaxy has ever seen. An opportunity to truly show these space armadillos what happens when you corner a species that thrives on impossible odds and an endless supply of bad jokes. Vance watched him, a slow, grudging smile beginning to form on her own lips. You're serious, aren't you? Never more so, Captain, Jax confirmed. We're going to disable that thing, and we're going to do it in a way that will make the Kroll commanders weep into their nutrient paste for centuries to come. He paused, then added, Operation Punchline is a go. The first challenge was simply getting to the superweapon. The Shadow Weaver, despite Vance's heroic efforts, was too damaged for any precision maneuvers. They were drifting, slowly, towards the target, which was good, but also meant they were a sitting duck. We need a distraction, Jax declared, pacing the tiny bridge. Something big, something loud, something that screams, Look over here, you overgrown grunts, while we sneak past. Vance sighed. And I suppose you have a plan for that, Riley? Do I ever not? Jax grinned. He's still got the emergency beacon, right? And I'm pretty sure I can get it to emit something even more annoying than before. He spent the next few hours tinkering with the beacon, cross-wiring it with salvage parts from the Shadow Weaver's defunct entertainment system. The result was a monstrosity of wires and flashing lights, humming with a low, malevolent energy. Behold, Captain, Jax announced, holding up the device with a flourish. The interstellar karaoke machine, guaranteed to send any crawl within range into a blind, murderous rage. Vance eyed it warily. What exactly does it play? A compilation of Earth's greatest hits, specifically chosen for their ability to annoy alien species, Jax explained. Think polka, mixed with early 21st century pop and a dash of bagpipes. All at maximum volume, through an uncontrolled frequency modulation. It's truly horrifying. You're going to launch that at them? Vance asked, a horrified fascination in her eyes. Not at them, Captain. Past them, Jax corrected. We'll slingshot it around the far side of the planet, aiming for their largest orbital station. It'll scream past, drawing their ships away from the superweapon, thinking it's another one of my escape pods. By the time they realize it's just bad music, we'll be long gone. The launch was tense. The Shadow Weaver's last functional thruster coughed, giving the beacon just enough momentum. Jax watched the interstellar karaoke machine disappear into the blackness, its horrific symphony already beginning to echo faintly through the comms. Goodbye, sweet torture device, Jax whispered. May your terrible tunes haunt their dreams. Within minutes, the Crow comms channels lit up. Panic, confusion, outrage. Their patrol ships, just as Jax predicted, broke formation and sped towards the source of the auditory assault, leaving the superweapon on the planet's surface surprisingly unguarded. It's working, Vance said, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lip. They're actually falling for it. Never underestimate the power of pure, unadulterated annoyance, Captain, Jax said. It's a human specialty. They began their slow, deliberate descent towards the planet's surface, aiming for a blind spot in the Carol's remaining ground-based sensor net. Their target, the colossal Ascension weapon. The descent through Xylos 7's atmosphere was less a controlled entry and more a prolonged, fiery prayer. The Shadow Weaver, never designed for atmospheric flight, groaned and shuddered, its ancient hull glowing cherry red from the friction. Inside, the cabin lights flickered, and loose panels rattled ominously. Are you sure this thing won't just turn into a giant, expensive fireball, Captain? Jax yelled over the roar of protesting metal, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, his knuckles white. 95% sure, Riley. Vance shouted back, her hands firmly on the controls, her face a mask of intense concentration. The other 5% is hoping the Carl don't notice the giant, expensive fireball. They aimed for a desolate, craggy region several kilometers from the Ascension superweapon, hoping its rough terrain would obscure their landing. The Shadow Weaver bounced violently as it entered the lower atmosphere, its remaining thrusters coughing out pathetic bursts of flame. With a final, bone-jarring impact, the ship slammed into a shallow ravine, sending a cloud of reddish dust and fragmented rock into the air. The interior went dark, then flickered back on with emergency power. Silence, save for the groan of tortured metal and the heavy breathing of two humans. Jax unbuckled, his limbs protesting. Well, that was exhilarating. 10 out of 10 for the landing, Captain. If we were aiming for crash-landed derelict that looked suspiciously like a discarded can opener. Vance let out a shaky breath, a wry smile touching her lips. I prefer to think of it as a tactical atmospheric insertion with unplanned deceleration. Tomato, tomato, Jax said, already heading for the main hatch. Right, time to meet our friendly neighborhood doomsday device. They donned their environmental suits. The air outside was thin, metallic-smelling, and filled with fine, reddish dust. The colossal Carl Ascension structure loomed on the horizon, an intimidating dark monolith, pulsing with a faint, malevolent red light. Even from this distance, its sheer scale was overwhelming. It was clearly not just a weapon, but a statement. "Okay, Captain, what's the plan?" Jax asked, checking his energy pistol. Still no charge. "My offensive capabilities are currently limited to throwing rocks and stern look." Vance brought up a holographic map on her wrist-mounted display. "Our intelligence indicates a primary power conduit running from a geothermal energy tap about 3 kilometers east of the main structure. If we can get inside there, we might be able to disrupt its power flow." "You want to walk into their power grid?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a shocking plan, Captain." Vance merely gave him a flat stare. "Stick to the mission, Riley. We need to move quickly. The Curl will realize their orbital stations aren't under attack eventually." They set out, moving through the desolate, rocky landscape, keeping to the ravines and shadows. The wind howled, whipping the dust around them, making visibility poor. It was a miserable trek, made worse by the knowledge that every step brought them closer to an unknown, potentially deadly enemy. After an hour of careful, silent movement, they spotted it. A squat, armored building, heavily fortified, with thick energy conduits snaking out of it and disappearing underground, presumably towards the main weapon. This was the geothermal energy tap. "Looks cozy," Jax muttered. "Probably filled with space armadillos with very short tempers." "Indeed," Vance agreed, pulling out a compact, high-frequency sensor. Scans indicate a small Krull patrol inside and automated turrets outside. Too heavily defended for a direct assault. "Direct assault? Who said anything about direct?" Jax grinned. "We're humans, Captain. We specialize in indirect, incredibly inconvenient assaults." "Got any spare comms units?" Vance eyed him suspiciously, but handed him a small generic comm unit. "What for?" Jax began to tinker with it, bypassing its internal comms and linking it to a frequency used by Krull maintenance drones. "We're going to give them a ghost in the machine, Captain." He then pulled out something small and spherical from a pouch on his belt. It looked like a child's toy, a small, multifaceted ball that glowed faintly. "What is that?" Vance asked. "My pocket disco ball," Jax explained. "Custom made. Emits a precise frequency that, when combined with the right data packet, can scramble alien sensor arrays. Useful for confusing automated turrets into thinking there's a rave going on." He armed the disco ball, then carefully lobbed it towards the nearest automated turret. It bounced off the ground, rolled a few feet, and then began to pulse with a rapid, multicolored light. Simultaneously, Jax sent a burst of data through the hacked comm unit. The turret, which had been tracking their position, suddenly spun erratically, its targeting lasers sweeping wildly across the landscape, seemingly aiming at nothing. Then, a faint, high-pitched whirring sound, like a tiny alien motor, began to emanate from the disco ball. "Is that the Macarena?" Vance whispered, straining to hear over the wind. "Close," Jax beamed. "It's a synthesized, incredibly off-key version of the song that never ends, guaranteed to make any sentient being want to rip their own auditory sensors out." The other turrets around the facility, their sensor nets now thoroughly confused by the light and the ear-splitting repetitive tune, also began to spin aimlessly. The KR inside the building must have been going insane. "Brilliant," Vance said, a genuine laugh escaping her. "Let's move." They dashed across the open ground, making it to the fortified entrance of the energy tap. The massive armored door was sealed shut. "Standard Kerr reinforced alloy," Vance noted, pressing her hand against it. "Designed to withstand orbital bombardment." "Good thing we're not using orbital bombardment," Jax replied, pulling out a small, unassuming device from another pouch. It looked like a glorified can opener, but it was glowing with a faint blue energy. "This, Captain, is the universal key, or as I like to call it, the door discombobulator." "What does it do?" "It vibrates at a frequency that messes with molecular bonds," Jax explained, pressing it against the door. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, it turns solid metal into very angry jelly. Eventually, it just falls apart. It's not fast, but it's guaranteed to annoy whoever's on the other side. The door discombobulator hummed, and the thick alloy of the door began to vibrate visibly, emitting a low, grating sound. After a minute, a faint crack appeared. After two, the crack widened into a spider web of fissures. Inside, they could hear agitated clicks and hisses. The Kerr were realizing their turrets were malfunctioning and their door was dissolving. "They're coming," Vance said, drawing her combat knife. "Get ready, Riley." "Ready as I'll ever be," Jax said, pulling out a handful of what looked like small metallic marbles. "Got a trick up my sleeve for the welcoming committee." The door finally buckled inwards with a wet thump, revealing 3 enraged Kerr soldiers, energy lances raised. They stopped dead, their red eyes blinking in confusion as they saw the 2 humans standing there, casually waiting. "Greetings, gentlemen," Jax chirped, scattering the marbles at their feet. "Having a bad day? Don't worry, it's about to get worse." The marbles, as they hit the ground, didn't explode. They didn't even spark. Instead, they began to emit a high-pitched, incredibly irritating chirping sound, like 1,000 tiny space crickets all singing off-key. Simultaneously, they vibrated, making the ground beneath the Kerr's feet feel like it was constantly shifting. The Crow roared in frustration, their sensitive hearing once again assaulted. One stumbled, its foot catching on another marble, sending it sprawling. Another swiped wildly, trying to crush the tiny, noisy annoyances. "Tactical sonic emitters, Captain," Jax explained to Vance, who was trying not to laugh. "Irritating to humans, absolutely maddening to Krull. They hate high-frequency noise." While the Krull were distracted by the sonic assault and their wobbly footing, Vance moved with a speed that belied her weary appearance. She leaped, her combat knife finding a weak point in the armor of one Krull, silencing it with a swift, brutal strike. Jax, not to be outdone, picked up a discarded wrench and, with a powerful swing, slammed it into the ocular cluster of another Krull that was still flailing at the chirping marbles. The Krull shrieked, its eye bursting in a shower of green fluid, and it collapsed. The third Krull, finally recovering, charged, its lance crackling. But Jax was ready. He ducked under its swing, then, using the momentum of the Krull's charge, kicked it squarely in the kneecap, an exposed joint. The Krull's multi-jointed leg buckled, and it went down with a surprised grunt. Before it could recover, Jax, with a surprisingly agile move, snatched its energy lance. "Hey look, a souvenir," he declared, examining it. "Think it comes in less likely to explode in my face model?" Vance stared at him, impressed despite herself. "Riley, you just took down 2 Krull with a wrench and some noisemakers, and then you stole a lance. Just showing them what happens when you underestimate a human with a bad mood and a good sense of timing," Jax said, hefting the lance. He powered it up. It hummed menacingly. "Now, let's go find that power core." They navigated the interior of the geothermal tap, a maze of glowing conduits, humming machinery, and occasional, very confused Krull, who had somehow managed to avoid the sonic marbles. Jax, surprisingly adept with the Krull lance, used it to blast through several internal bulkheads, while Vance provided covering fire with her pistol. They reached the central chamber, a vast glowing core pulsed with raw energy, radiating intense heat. Massive energy conduits snaked out from it, disappearing into the ground. "This is it," Vance said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and dread. "The power source for the Ascension weapon. So how do we turn it off?" Jax asked, looking around. "Is there a giant off button? Or is it more complicated, like pull the red wire, but only after you've recited the entire HCDF code of conduct backwards?" Vance scanned the control panels. "It's a Krull core. Highly redundant, self-repairing. Disabling it completely would take a tactical nuke." Jax's face fell. "So, we walked all this way for nothing?" "Not necessarily," Vance said, a glint in her eye. "We can't disable it, but we can disrupt it, overload it, cause a chain reaction that destabilizes the main weapon's energy signature for long enough for the HCDF to get a lock on it and send in a real strike team." "And how do we do that?" Jax asked, suddenly very interested. Vance pointed to a series of pressure valves around the core. "These are the thermal regulators. If we can open them all simultaneously, it will cause a massive, uncontrolled energy surge. It'll buy us time, maybe a lot of time." "All simultaneously?" Jax looked at the valves. There were 6 of them, spaced far apart. "Captain, there are 2 of us, and I'm guessing once we open the first one, it's going to get really hot, really fast, and probably alert every space armadillo on the planet." "Precisely," Vance confirmed, a challenging look in her eyes. Think you're up to a little synchronized chaos, Riley? Jax grinned, his old spark returning. Captain, I was born for synchronized chaos. You take 3 on the left, I'll take 3 on the right, on my mark. And try not to get vaporized, it ruins the dramatic effect. He looked at the crow lance in his hand, then back at the glowing core. This was it, the real punchline. The air in the core chamber was already sweltering, the hum of the geothermal energy core, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through their environmental suits. Jax and Vance took their positions, 3 thermal regulators each, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. This was it, the moment of truth, or, more accurately, the moment of glorious system-wide meltdown. "Ready, Captain?" Jax yelled over the thrum, hefting the crow lance. He decided against using it directly on the regulators. Blunt force was always more satisfying. "As I'll ever be, Riley," Vance replied, her voice taut with anticipation. "On your mark." "All right," Jax took a deep breath. "On the count of 3. 1, 2, and for all the space armadillos who don't appreciate a good pun, 3, they moved simultaneously. Jax, with a surge of adrenaline, slammed the butt of the crow lance against the first regulator. The ancient metal shrieked, then the valve handle groaned and snapped open with a clang. A gush of superheated plasma hissed out, instantly turning the air around him into a shimmering heat haze. The crow lance, not designed for such abuse, sparked ominously. Vance, employing a more precise technique, used a specialized cutting tool to sever the locking mechanisms on her first regulator, twisting the valve open with a grunt of effort. More plasma erupted, adding to the inferno. Immediately, klaxons blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights flashed, painting the chamber in a hellish glow. A harsh alien voice, likely a computer, began to shriek warnings in the Krill language, its tone escalating from alarm to outright panic. "Warning! Core integrity compromised. Immediate evacuation recommended." "They noticed!" Jax yelled, already sprinting to the next regulator, the heat radiating off the first one, baking his suit. He could feel sweat beading on his brow despite the environmental controls. "Keep going, Riley!" Vance shouted, already at her second valve, sparks flying as she wrestled it open. "They'll be here any second!" The core itself began to pulse erratically, its green glow flickering to an angry orange. The hum intensified, becoming a deafening roar that vibrated through their bones. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Jax reached his second valve, kicking it violently. It resisted, then groaned open with a wrenching screech, spitting more plasma. The crow lance let out a final, pained pop and went dead in his hands. "Well, so much for the souvenir," he grumbled, tossing it aside. He grabbed a heavy, discarded pipe lying nearby. Old school it is. As he ran to his third and final regulator, the main door to the chamber, which they had come through, burst inwards with a furious crash. A squad of heavily armored Krull soldiers poured in, their energy lances already powering up. They stopped short, momentarily stunned by the chaos, the heat, and the sight of 2 tiny humans systematically dismantling their power grid. "Humans, cease your destruction!" one of them shrieked. Jax didn't even look at them. He was focused on his last valve, bringing the heavy pipe down on it with all his might. The metal shrieked, protesting. "You know, this reminds me of my first job," he yelled, grunting with effort. Couldn't get anything to work, had to hit it with a wrench. The Krull opened fire. Energy bolts streaked past Jax, melting the wall behind him. Vance, having just opened her third valve, fired her pistol, keeping their attention, then scrambled towards Jax. "Last one, Riley," she urged, dodging a plasma blast. With a final, desperate grunt, Jax put all his weight into the pipe. The valve shrieked and tore free, spewing a geyser of superheated energy. The entire core chamber became a maelstrom of light, heat, and screaming alarms. The colossal ascension weapon above them, connected directly to this core, would now be receiving a massively unstable energy flow. Its internal systems would be struggling. It wouldn't be long before it either exploded or at least powered down long enough for HCDF to target it. "That's it," Vance yelled, grabbing Jax's arm. "We've done it. Now run!" They sprinted back through the facility, the air thick with smoke and ozone. The Carroll soldiers were in disarray, some firing wildly, others trying to secure the collapsing core chamber. They were too focused on the catastrophe Jax and Vance had created to mount an effective pursuit. As they burst out of the geothermal tap, the Carroll pocket disco ball was still pulsing, playing its awful, never-ending song, its light blinding the remaining turrets which were still spinning helplessly. "My hero!" Jax cheered, giving the disco ball a thumbs up. "Best 7 credits I ever spent." They ran back across the desolate landscape, the ground still trembling from the energy surges below. The Ascension weapon on the horizon was now pulsing with a violent, unstable red light, occasionally flaring with massive, uncontrolled energy discharges. It was an impressive, terrifying light show. "Hurry, Riley," Vance urged, already heading towards the downed Shadow Weaver. "The Carroll will be sending ground reinforcements any minute." They scrambled into the ship, sealing the hatch just as the ground began to crack beneath them. "All right, Captain," Jax gasped. "Any chance this rust bucket can still fly?" Vance, already at the controls, shook her head. "No, thrusters are gone, but I think I can get us to hop. One last, desperate, extremely uncontrolled hop." "Hop?" "More like a controlled fall with a thrust vector," Vance explained, her fingers flying over the console. "We'll use the remaining auxiliary power to blast us upwards, then aim for the upper atmosphere. The Carroll orbital denial grid will be in chaos after that energy surge. It's our only chance." "Sounds like my kind of plan," Jax cheered, strapping himself in. "Just don't forget to yell Geronimo." The Shadow Weaver groaned, its last remaining systems groaning in protest. With a final, agonizing shriek of tortured metal and a blast of superheated air from below, the ship lurched upwards, a defiant, sputtering projectile rising from the planet's surface. They burst through the upper atmosphere, a comet of scrap metal and sheer human will. Behind them, Silo 7 glowed ominously, the Ascension weapon on its surface flaring violently, its power unstable and disrupted. They had done it. Days later, the HCDF flagship Indomitable, a behemoth of a cruiser, hung silently in orbit above a neutral sector. Inside its spotless medical bay, Jax, Jester, Riley, patched up and surprisingly cheerful, was regaling a small crowd of bewildered medical officers and newly arrived HCDF brass with his tale. And then I said, "What do you call a Carroll who's lost his energy lance?" Jax paused for dramatic effect. "An unarmed Adillo." A few polite chuckles, mostly out of confusion. Captain Vance, sitting in a nearby biobed, looking considerably less battered but just as weary, rolled her eyes. And then Jax continued, "I hit the emergency vent button, and the chieftain went gasp, 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 like a space fish out of water. Priceless. A senior Krull ambassador, Ambassador Xylar, a surprisingly calm and articulate individual who served as their species' official representative in ceasefire negotiations, watched Jax from a corner of the room. He had been present during the debriefing where Jax's full report, including the details of his psychological warfare tactics, had been delivered. Xylar's multifaceted eyes were still processing the information. He stepped forward, his clicks and hisses modulated through a translator. "Lieutenant Commander Riley," he began, his voice a low rumble, "we have analyzed your methods. The tactical report from our forces on Xylos 7 is disturbing." Jax grinned. "Glad I could be of service, Ambassador. Always here to disturb and annoy. Our chieftain, Krylar, was found deceased," Xylar continued, a distinct note of confusion in his tone. "The cause of death was attributed to atmospheric purging, but your reports indicate prior psychological trauma and protein bar residue." "He had it coming," Jax shrugged. "Never try to vivisect a human before their morning coffee." Ambassador Xylar paused, his singular red eye fixing on Jax. The same question that Krylar had asked, the question that had echoed through the Krull comms networks, the question that had become an obsession for their military analysts, was finally posed again. This time with a deep, almost philosophical weight. "Lieutenant Commander Riley," Xylar repeated, his voice slow and deliberate, "you were surrounded by our forces, outnumbered, outgunned, alone, facing certain death, even vivisection. Yet you laughed, you smiled, and you continued to mock our warriors even as you inflicted such indignity upon them. Why? Why did you smile, human, when you were surrounded by monsters? The room fell silent. All eyes were on Jax. The HCDF officers, the medical staff, even Captain Vance waited. This was the moment, the core of the enigma that was Jax Jester Riley. Jax looked at the ambassador, then at the assembled faces. He thought about the endless impossible odds, the sheer absurdity of his situation, the joy of turning certain defeat into a chaotic, infuriating ballet of annoyance. He thought about humanity's stubborn refusal to give up, our knack for finding humor in the darkest places, for fighting with wit when brawn failed. A wide, genuine smile spread across his face, not a jester's grin, but a profound, almost mischievous one. "Because, Ambassador," Jax said, his voice soft but clear, echoing through the sterile medical bay. "The moment I realized I was surrounded by your monsters, I also realized something else." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing the tension to build. The Krell ambassador leaned forward, captivated. "I realized," Jax concluded, his smile widening, "that you just haven't met real monsters yet." A beat of stunned silence. Then, Xylar, the seasoned diplomat, the negotiator who had faced down countless alien species, slowly, deliberately, began to back away. His single red eye widened, a flicker of something akin to primal fear in its depths. His clicking mandible worked, but no words came out. The HCDF officers exchanged confused glances. Vance, however, understood. She knew the history of humanity, our internal struggles, our capacity for true savagery when provoked. She knew the darkness that lurked beneath the laughter, the resilience born from millennia of conflict. Ambassador Xylar turned, and without another word, shambled out of the medical bay. His rigid posture subtly slumped. He returned to his ship, his mind reeling. He would report to his high command. He would try to explain, but how could he convey the horrifying truth of what the human had implied? The Ascension weapon, currently being stabilized by Krell engineers, would be vulnerable to a full HCDF strike in a matter of hours, thanks to Jax's actions. The Krell would suffer a strategic defeat, but they had gained something far more profound and far more terrifying. They had gained a haunting, chilling understanding of humanity, an understanding that would echo through their species' history. They had faced a single human, disarmed and alone, who had laughed in the face of their might. And the reason he had laughed was because he believed, with every fiber of his being, that they, the Krell, were simply amateurs. The question, "You're surrounded by monsters, why are you smiling?" had been answered. And the answer haunted them forever, because it meant the real monsters were still out there.